The old adage that friends are the family we choose whispered through Elaine's mind as she steered her battered sedan along the winding road leading to the decrepit mansion on the outskirts of Willow's Peak. The mansion, an ominous relic of the past, had been in her family for generations, mostly abandoned except for the occasional dare or an unfortunate daredevil. This weekend, however, it was the chosen venue for a reunion of college friends, a gathering that had seemed innocuous when first proposed. As she drove, the dense fog seemed to crawl closer, enveloping her car like a shroud. By the time she reached the gates, the mansion loomed over her, its silhouette a jagged contrast against the cloudy, moonlit sky. The air was thick with the scent of moss and decay. Inside, the house was dimly lit, the walls adorned with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. The living room where they had all agreed to meet was already buzzing with laughter and conversation, a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the estate grounds. "Elaine. You made it," called out a voice. It was Jessica, her college roommate, waving her over. Jessica, with her radiant smile and a knack for soothing even the most frayed nerves, had organized the event. As Elaine mingled, the old gang was all there: Tom, the jokester, Sarah, the planner, Derek, the quiet one, and several others. They reminisced, their laughter echoing through the grand old house, stirring the dust of ages. As night fell, the power flickered and went out, plunging the mansion into darkness. The group's initial amusement soon turned to unease as the backup generator failed to kick in. "Typical," Tom joked, his voice slicing through the tension. "A haunted mansion and no lights. What could possibly go wrong?" They decided to light the large fireplace, and as the fire crackled, Jessica suggested they pass the time with ghost stories. One by one, they shared tales of spectral hauntings and urban legends. When it was Elaine's turn, she hesitated, then spoke of a local myth surrounding the mansion itself, the tale of the betrayed maiden. "Legend has it," Elaine began, her voice barely above a whisper, "that a young woman was murdered here by her closest friends, out of envy and greed. They say her spirit still roams these halls, screaming for vengeance against those who betray their friends." The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. The atmosphere had shifted, the playful fear had turned into something palpable. It was Sarah who broke the silence. "Let's not let a silly story ruin our night," she said with a forced laugh. But the mood had undeniably changed. Chapter 11, disturbances unearthed. The soil of the grave was clumpy and moist, clinging to their shovels with a stubbornness that seemed almost protective. As they delved deeper, an oppressive silence settled over the graveyard, punctuated only by the occasional crack of thunder in the distance. The air grew colder with each shovel of dirt removed, as if the very ground was warning them to stop. Suddenly, Tom's shovel hit something hard. He knelt down, clearing away the dirt with his hands. Beneath the layer of earth was a small, rusted iron box. Its surface was etched with the same symbols they had seen on the box found in the cellar. With a look of trepidation, Tom lifted the box from the grave and wiped off the dirt. The lock was corroded, easily breaking when Derek pried it open with a piece of a shovel. Inside, they found a collection of personal items: a silver hairpin, a folded piece of velvet cloth, and a small book bound in dark leather. The book was a diary, the entries written in a flowing, elegant script. As they leafed through the pages by the light of their flashlights, they discovered it belonged to the woman known as the betrayer, her words revealing the remorse and anguish that had consumed her after Elizabeth's death. "I am haunted by my deeds," one entry read. The face of my dear friend, twisted in the throes of betrayal, visits me each night. I fear there is no redemption for a soul as damned as mine. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, as if echoing the despair in her words. They took the items and decided to return to the mansion. The storm was approaching, and with it, a sense of impending finality. Chapter 12, Confrontation in the storm. Back inside the mansion, the group gathered in the main hall, the air thick with anticipation. They laid the items from the betrayer's grave on the grand old table that dominated the room. Outside, the storm unleashed its fury, lightning illuminating the room in stark, fleeting glimpses. "We need to use these," Jessica said, pointing to the hairpin and the diary. "Maybe they can help us communicate with her, understand how to free them both." With the locket as their conduit, they formed a circle around the table, each person placing a hand on the velvet cloth. Jessica held the hairpin in her other hand, reaching out with her thoughts to the woman who had caused so much pain. "Hear us," she called into the darkness, her voice strong despite the fear that gripped her heart. "We seek to undo the wrongs of the past, to bring peace to those who have been wronged." The air in the room shifted, growing denser, and a palpable sense of sadness filled the space. Then a voice, soft yet clear, spoke from the shadows. Too late for forgiveness." Lightning flashed, and for a brief moment, the figure of a woman appeared in front of them, her expression one of deep sorrow and regret. She looked at the items on the table, her gaze lingering on the diary. "We understand your pain," Elaine spoke up, her voice steady. "But it's not too late to make amends. Help us help you and Elizabeth find peace." The figure seemed to consider her words, then slowly nodded. "The curse binds us," she said, her voice a whisper of wind. "Break the curse, break the chains that hold us to this world." "How?" Tom asked, his voice urgent. "Tell us what to do." The ghostly figure pointed towards the diary. "The words of the confession, it must be known." Chapter 13, The Curse Revealed. They turned the pages of the diary until they came to a long entry, a confession that detailed the plot against Elizabeth and expressed the woman's profound regret. Jessica read it aloud, her voice echoing through the hall. As she read, the storm outside seemed to reach a crescent, the wind screaming like the tormented souls themselves. The air inside the mansion vibrated with a tense energy, as if the house itself was waiting for release. With the final words of the confession spoken, a silence fell. The oppressive atmosphere lifted suddenly, as if a heavy weight had been removed from their shoulders. The locket on the table glowed brightly for a moment, then dimmed. They looked around, half expecting something dramatic to happen. But there was only silence, and the feeling of peace was unmistakable. "We did it," Derek breathed, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." They gathered the items, placing them back in the iron box. As they prepared to leave the mansion, a sense of closure enveloping them, they felt lighter, as though they had been part of righting a deep and terrible wrong. As they exited the Chapter 14, lingering shadows, the storm began to ebb as the group made their way through the mansion's dimly lit corridors for the last time. The house, once suffocating with its oppressive atmosphere, now seemed almost serene, a monument to its tragic past that had finally found some semblance of peace. Yet, as they approached the grand entrance, the sense of closure they felt was tinged with an unsettling undertone. Each step echoed ominously through the hall, as if the mansion itself was reluctantly letting go of its long-held secrets. Did we really do enough? Sarah murmured, her voice echoing slightly in the vast foyer. Her question hung in the air, unanswered, as they all felt the residual weight of history that no confession or act of redemption could entirely erase. Elaine clutched the iron box tightly against her chest. "I hope so," she replied, her gaze fixed on the front door, which now seemed like a portal back to normalcy. "I guess some places just hold onto their ghosts." As they reached the front door, a sudden chill swept through the entryway, causing them to pause. A soft, almost inaudible whisper floated through the air, a sigh of relief or perhaps a final farewell, they couldn't tell. They stepped outside, the fresh air a stark contrast to the mustiness of the mansion. The ground was wet with rain, reflecting the moonlight in puddles that looked like small mirrors. Turning back, they looked at the mansion, its facade now peaceful under the moon's gentle illumination. Chapter 15. The departure. Their cars were just as they had left them, though they seemed out of place in this timeless setting. As they loaded the last of their belongings into the trunks and slammed the doors shut, the reality of their normal lives awaited them, a stark departure from the night's eerie events. "Let's not wait for another reunion like this," Tom joked, but his laughter was hollow, not quite reaching his eyes. The others nodded, the smiles on their faces bittersweet as they each felt the night's experiences etched into their memory. One by one, they got into their cars, the engines coming to life with roars that broke the remaining silence of the night. Derek was the last to leave, taking one long look at the mansion. "Goodbye, Elizabeth," he whispered, not sure why he felt the need to say it aloud. As they drove down the winding driveway, the mansion receded into the background, becoming once again the silent sentinel over its somber history. The night was clearer now, the storm having passed, leaving a sense of calm that belied the intensity of the evening. Chapter 16. Echoes of the past. The drive back to their respective homes was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts. The radio played softly in the background, the mundane news reports a jarring contrast to the supernatural events they had just witnessed. Elaine thought about the diary and the locket, now safely locked away in the iron box. She wondered if they had truly managed to free the spirits or merely appeased them temporarily. The history of the mansion and its spectral inhabitants felt like a heavy cloak she had draped over her shoulders, a burden she would now carry. Jessica kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Elizabeth's sad, ghostly face looking back at her. But there was nothing, only the dark road and the occasional headlights from other late-night travelers. As they neared the city, the familiar sights of civilization began to replace the eerie images of the night. Streetlights flickered on as they passed, casting long shadows across the road that seemed to flicker with unknown meanings. Chapter 17. Unsettled futures. Back in her apartment, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The clock ticked loudly, marking the passage of time, but the images from the night played in a loop in her mind. She thought she could still feel the cold touch of the cellar air, hear the whispered plea of a long-dead woman. In their own homes, the others were likely wrestling with similar thoughts. They had entered the mansion as skeptics and believers in the mundane, only to leave touched by the supernatural. Could they ever really go back to not knowing, to not feeling the thin veil between this world and the next? The night at the mansion would haunt them, perhaps not as overtly as Elizabeth and her betrayer haunted its halls, but as a silent whisper in the back of their minds, a shadow in their peripheral vision, a chill in the air that wouldn't go away. Their lives had been changed, irrevocably altered by their experience, and as dawn crept over the horizon, the first light of morning brought no relief, only the realization that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. Chapter 18, The Final Return. As dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Sarah's inability to sleep drove her back to the only place she believed she could find her answers, the mansion. The drive felt automatic, each turn in the road drawing her closer to what she hoped would be closure. Upon arriving, the mansion stood bathed in the soft light of morning, its menacing presence somewhat diminished but still imposing. Sarah walked to the front door, her steps heavy with a mix of dread and determination. Inside, the mansion was silent, the echoes of last night's revelation still hanging in the air like a thick fog. Sarah moved through the rooms, each step reigniting memories of their ghostly encounters. When she reached the library, she paused. The room where they had called out to the spirits felt unnaturally cold. "Elizabeth, are you still here?" Sarah whispered into the silence. A gentle breeze fluttered through the room, pages from an open book rustled softly in response. Then a warmth enveloped Sarah, a stark contrast to the chill she felt earlier. It was a comforting presence, wrapping around her like a soothing embrace. Realizing she was not alone, Sarah spoke again, her voice steady. "We tried to help you. Please tell me it was enough." Their warmth intensified, and a soft, almost imperceptible voice filled the room. "Rest now, all is settled." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as relief washed over her. Their haunting had ended, not just the spirit's unrest, but her own. Chapter 19, Healing. Outside, the sun rose higher, its rays piercing through the dense trees surrounding the mansion, illuminating paths and shadows alike. Sarah walked out into the garden, where the graves of Elizabeth and her betrayer lay. Fresh dirt from their nightstick was a stark reminder of the physical and metaphysical journeys they had undertaken. As she stood there, the others arrived, drawn back to the mansion by the same unspoken need that had brought Sarah. They exchanged looks, a silent acknowledgement of the night's wait and this morning's uncharacteristic pull back to the mansion. Together, they cleaned up the site, restoring the graves to a state of dignity. It was their way of honoring the past, acknowledging the spirits they had disturbed, and attempting to make amends. Tom, who had always been the skeptic, looked around and sighed. "I guess there are things in this world that just can't be explained." Elmeline nodded. "But we can accept them, learn from them, and maybe find peace." Chapter 20, The Last Goodbye. The group left the mansion for the final time, each taking a moment to look back. The mansion, once a place of horror and mystery, now stood quiet and, somehow, serene. They felt a palpable sense of peace, as if the mansion itself was finally at rest. As they drove away, the landscape that had once seemed so foreboding now appeared beautiful, touched by the morning light. They talked little on the way back, each lost in their own reflections of the past and thoughts of the future. In the city, life moved on as usual, but for Sarah, Derek, Elaine, Jessica, and Tom, the world had shifted slightly on its axis. They had touched something beyond the veil, felt the weight of history, and seen firsthand the power of unresolved spirits. They remained in touch, bound not just by their past as friends but now also by their shared experience. Sometimes they would talk about that night, turning over the events in their minds, wondering about the mysteries of the universe that lay just out of sight. But always, in the back of their minds, was the mansion, the memories of that night, the sounds, the cold, and the voices. It was a reminder of the thin line between this world and the next, a line they had crossed and returned from, forever changed. The mansion remained standing, a silent sentinel to the history it held, its windows catching the light of setting suns and rising moons, a beacon of the past's enduring presence in the now tranquil woods. Its legacy, like the stories within it, would linger in the minds of those who dared to uncover it, a timeless tale of reconciliation and the everlasting quest for peace. Chapter 2, The First Encounter. As the evening progressed, Derek suggested they explore the mansion. Equipped with flashlights, they split into groups. Elaine, Jessica, and Tom ventured into the west wing, where the air felt noticeably colder. Their laughter had subsided, replaced by the soft shuffling of their feet and the occasional eerie creak of the old wooden floorboards. As they reached the end of a long corridor, Tom, who was leading, stopped abruptly. "Do you guys see that?" he whispered, pointing at a shadow at the end of the hallway. As they watched, the shadow seemed to move, almost as if it was breathing. "It's just your imagination," Elaine said, though her voice tremored. "No, look." Jessica gasped. Before them, the shadow morphed into the figure of a woman, her features ghastly pale and her eyes hollow. She reached out towards them with a hand that seemed to be made of mist. They ran, hearts pounding, back to the safety of the group, who listened to their tale with varying degrees of skepticism. But as they debated the reality of what had been seen, a chilling scream echoed through the mansion, cutting off any doubt. It was Sarah. Rushing towards the source, they found her in the library, her face ashen, staring at a book she had pulled from a shelf. The pages were old and yellowed, but clearly visible was a photograph of a group of people, remarkably similar to their own group, all dressed in the fashion of a bygone era. "That's impossible," Sarah stuttered, pointing at a woman in the picture who bore an uncanny resemblance to Elaine. "This was taken over 100 years ago." As they absorbed the impossible reality, the temperature dropped sharply, and the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The fire in the fireplace flickered wildly as if reacting to an unseen energy. "It's her," Tom whispered. "The betrayed maiden." Chapter 3, The Unseen Forces. The flickering of the flames cast long, sinister shadows across the walls of the library, as the group huddled together, staring at the haunting photograph. The resemblance was uncanny, sending a chill down each spine. The air grew colder, and the dim light seemed to pulse with an eerie life of its own. "Maybe we should just leave," Sarah suggested, her voice shaking, the rational part of her brain screaming for them to flee the mansion. But Derek, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "And let a practical joke scare us away. No, we're just freaking ourselves out. It's probably just a coincidence." Elaine wasn't so sure. The woman in the photograph, her doppelganger, stared back at her with hollow, accusing eyes. She turned to Jessica, who seemed lost in thought, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Jess, what do you think?" Elaine asked, hoping her friend could offer a rational explanation. Jessica slowly shook her head, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. "I don't know, Elaine. This is beyond anything I can rationalize. But maybe there's a way to find out more. We could look for records or a diary. Old houses like this usually have something." Motivated by Jessica's suggestion, they split up again, searching for any clues that might explain the photograph and the unsettling occurrences. The mansion seemed to groan under the weight of its own history as they moved through its halls. Tom, Elaine, and Derek headed towards the study, a room filled with dusty books and ancient furniture. As they sifted through the piles of paper and old ledgers, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut, causing them all to jump. "Okay, that's not funny anymore," Tom said, his voice edged with irritation. They continued their search, more determined now to uncover something tangible. It was Derek who found the hidden panel behind the bookshelf. With a collective breath held, they watched as he slid it open to reveal a small, hidden room. Inside was a desk covered with papers and a journal, aged and bound in leather. "This could be it," Derek murmured, picking up the journal. They gathered around, flipping through the pages, their flashlights casting more shadows than light. The entries were dated back to the 1800s, written by Elizabeth Morrow, the supposed betrayed maiden. As they read, the story unfolded, a tale of friendship turned sour, of betrayal and murder. Elizabeth wrote of her friends, how they had grown jealous of her inheritance, plotting against her to claim her wealth. The final entry was chilling, a foreboding warning: "Should treachery darken my doorstep, let it be known that my spirit shall not rest, nor shall the traitors find peace." The words echoed in the silent room, each letter steeped in dread. They left the study, the journal in Elaine's hands, feeling the weight of Elizabeth's unresolved anguish. Chapter 4: Hauntings Deepen. Returning to the group, they shared their findings. The mood had grown somber, the playful edge of their initial gathering long since evaporated. The mansion seemed to close in around them, the walls whispering secrets of the past. As night deepened, the paranormal activity intensified. Lights flickered, doors opened and closed of their own volition, and the temperature fluctuated wildly. The group was on edge, every sound and movement causing hearts to leap. "I think we should really leave," Sarah insisted again, her nerves frayed. But the curiosity, mixed now with a sense of dread, kept them there. They needed answers, needed to understand why the spirit of Elizabeth seemed so restless, so vengeful. "Let's try to communicate with her," Jessica proposed, a determined look on her face. "If we can understand what she wants, maybe we can help her find peace." Using a makeshift Ouija board from an old game found in one of the rooms, they gathered around, placing their fingers lightly on the planchette. The candlelight flickered as they began to call out to Elizabeth. "Elizabeth Morrow, we seek to understand your pain," Jessica spoke into the darkness, her voice steady. "Tell us what you want from us." The planchette moved slowly at first, then with increasing speed, spelling out the words, "Betrayal must be repented." A cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. In the darkness, a low moan echoed, chilling them to the bone. The flashlight beams darted around, catching glimpses of a figure in white drifting through the halls. They followed, led by the spectral vision of Elizabeth, down to the cellar, a place none had ventured yet. The air was damp and musty, the smell of earth and mildew pervasive. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the figure vanished, leaving them. Chapter 5: The cellar secret. Standing at the foot of the cellar stairs, the darkness enveloped the group like a suffocating blanket. Their flashlights barely penetrated the blackness, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath their feet felt unnaturally cold. "I don't like this," whispered Sarah, her voice trembling. "It feels like we're not supposed to be here." But the curiosity that had driven them this far wouldn't allow them to turn back. With each step deeper into the cellar, the air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over them. "Look there," Derek said, pointing to a corner where the dim light from their flashlights revealed an old wooden chest. It was large, with rusted iron bands and a heavy padlock hanging open, as though inviting them to look inside. Slowly, Tom approached the chest and lifted the lid. A musty smell wafted out, and inside they found an assortment of old clothes, a few moth-eaten books, and at the very bottom, a small, intricately carved box. It was out of place among the mundane items, its surface etched with symbols that none of them recognized. Elaine reached for the box, her hand shaking slightly. As her fingers touched the wood, a cold wind blew through the cellar, causing the lights to flicker. She hesitated, then took the box and opened it. Inside was a locket, beautifully preserved, and a folded piece of parchment. Unfolding the parchment, they found it was a letter, written in a flowing script that was difficult to read in the dim light. Jessica took the letter, holding it close to her flashlight. "It's from Elizabeth," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's addressed to her betrayer." The letter was a heartfelt plea and a curse. Elizabeth wrote of her deep sense of betrayal by one she had loved as a sister, and she cursed the traitor and her descendants to never know peace until her own spirit was avenged. As Jessica read aloud, the temperature in the cellar dropped, and a palpable sense of despair filled the air. The group stood in stunned silence, the weight of Elizabeth's centuries-old pain pressing down on them. "Guys, we need to figure out what she wants," Elaine said. "Maybe there's something we can do to help her spirit find peace." They agreed to search the mansion for any further clues that might help them understand Elizabeth's life and her death. Splitting up once again, they combed through the remaining rooms of the mansion, each corner revealing more about the tragic history of the house. Chapter 6: Whispers and Warnings. In the attic, Sarah and Derek found a trunk filled with old diaries and letters belonging to other members of Elizabeth's family. They pored over the pages, looking for anything that might help them understand the curse and how to break it. Below, in the library, Tom and Elaine sifted through more of the family's history. Among the dusty tomes and faded photographs, they uncovered a genealogy that traced Elizabeth's lineage, and startlingly, the lineage of her betrayer. The realization dawned that the consequences of the betrayal had rippled through generations, ensnaring them all in a web of spectral vengeance. Meanwhile, Jessica stayed in the cellar, drawn to the energy there. She sat by the old chest, the locket from the box now around her neck, and tried to reach out to Elizabeth's spirit. "Elizabeth, we want to help you," she whispered into the darkness. "Please show us how." The air around her grew icy, and the locket suddenly felt heavy against her chest. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, Jessica found herself walking deeper into the cellar. Her flashlight flickered as she came upon a hidden door she hadn't noticed before. With a sense of dread but driven by a need to know the truth, Jessica pushed the door open. A rush of cold air met her, and she stepped into a small, hidden room. Here, the atmosphere was different, thick with sorrow and anger. On the wall, written in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "Justice for the betrayed." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine as she realized this must have been where Elizabeth had met her tragic end. She called the others, her voice echoing strangely in the cramped space. As they gathered in the hidden room, they all felt the oppressive energy that seemed to emanate from the walls. They knew then that they were close to uncovering the full story, close to understanding what needed to be done to set Elizabeth's spirit free. But as they stood together, the locket around Jessica's neck began to glow faintly, and a voice, soft and full of sorrow, filled the room. "Help me," it whispered, just as the walls seemed to Chapter 7, echoes of the past. The whisper was so faint, almost drowned out by the sound of their own breathing, but unmistakable in its desperation. The group stood frozen, each one feeling the air around them grow denser, as if the very atmosphere was thick with unshed tears and pent-up rage. "It's her," Jessica whispered back, her voice trembling. "Elizabeth is here with us." They listened intently, the only sound the soft creaking of the old mansion settling around them. Then, clearer this time, the voice came again, imbued with a sorrowful clarity. "Avenge me." Tom, usually the skeptic, swallowed hard. "What do we need to do?" he asked the empty air, his usual bravado nowhere to be seen. The locket grew warmer against Jessica's chest, pulsing like a heartbeat. She felt a tug, a silent command to explore deeper into the room. Against the far wall, obscured by years of dust and cobwebs, was a painting. It depicted a group of women, all dressed in the style of the late 1800s, standing around a garden. One of them was unmistakably Elizabeth, her features mirroring the portrait they had seen earlier. Next to her was a woman with a sharp gaze and a sly smile, her hand resting on Elizabeth's shoulder. "That must be her," Derek pointed out, stepping closer to examine the painting. "The betrayer." The air around them grew chillier as they discussed their next steps. They needed to find out more about this woman, to understand her connection to Elizabeth and perhaps confront her lingering spirit if it was indeed trapped within these walls along with Elizabeth's. Chapter 8, The Séance. Determined to reach out to Elizabeth more directly, the group decided to conduct a séance. They returned to the library, where they felt closest to the heart of the mansion, and arranged themselves around a large oak table. The locket was placed in the center, serving as a conduit for their communication. Jessica led the séance, her hands trembling slightly as she closed her eyes and called out to the spirits residing in the mansion. "Elizabeth Morrow, we seek to bring you peace. Show us how to avenge your betrayal." The candles flickered as the wind howled outside, a storm brewing as if nature itself was reacting to their call. The locket began to vibrate, its glow intensifying. "We are here to help," Elaine said, her voice firm, trying to push her fear aside. "Tell us what you need." The room grew colder, their breath visible in the air as they waited. Then, a voice, stronger now, filled the room, emanating from nowhere yet felt by everyone. "Find the truth. Unveil the betrayal. Let the world know." The candles blew out suddenly, plunging them into darkness. A loud bang echoed from the upper floors, and the house seemed to groan under the weight of its hidden secrets. They needed to investigate further, to uncover the historical truths that were buried deep within these walls. Chapter 9, Unearthing Secrets. Equipped with flashlights, they ascended the creaking staircase to the attic where Sarah and Derek had discovered the trunk earlier. They dug deeper this time, unearthing letters and diaries that hadn't been touched in decades. Each document peeled back layers of history, revealing a tapestry of love, jealousy, and deceit. Among the yellowed pages, they found letters exchanged between the woman in the painting and a mysterious figure only referred to as M. The letters spoke of a plan, a way to rid themselves of Elizabeth and claim her fortune. The depth of the betrayal was more sinister than they had imagined. As they pieced together the story from the fragments of the past, they realized that the spirit of the betrayer might also be bound to the mansion, her soul intertwined with Elizabeth's in their eternal conflict. "We need to find her grave," Derek suggested. "Maybe there's something there, something that can help free them both." Chapter 10, The Graveyard. Under the light of the full moon, they walked through the overgrown garden to the small family cemetery that lay on the edge of the property. The wind whispered through the trees, and the leaves rustled as if speaking in hushed tones about the intruders in their midst. They found the graves of Elizabeth and the woman from the painting, side by side, the irony of their eternal rest together not lost on the group. The grave of Elizabeth's betrayer was unmarked, perhaps as a final condemnation of her actions. Gathering their courage, they began to dig, the sound of shovels slicing through the earth mingling with the night sounds. They needed to find a relic, something personal that belonged to the betrayer, to help sever the tie that bound the spirits to the mansion. As they dug deeper, the air grew tense.